The United States Marine Corps is one of the proudest fighting forces on Earth. Yet for more than 160 years, it refused to let a single black man wear its uniform. When that door finally opened, the first black recruits were forced to train separately and fight for the right to serve. This is the story of the Montford Point Marines, and it took their country 70 years to say thank you. Of all the branches of the American military, the Marine Corps held out the longest. The Army had black soldiers, the Navy had black sailors, even if it mostly limited them to serving food. But the Marines, since the days of the American Revolution, had kept their ranks entirely white. To be a Marine was held up as something special, an elite brotherhood, and the leadership of the Corps intended to keep it closed. For more than a century and a half, no black American was permitted to become a United States Marine, and the man at the top wanted to keep it that way. In the years before the war, the Commandant of the Marine Corps made his position brutally clear to the leadership of the Navy. He said that if the choice were between a Marine Corps of 5,000 white men or 250,000 black men, he would rather have the 5,000 whites. That was the official attitude at the very top of the institution these men wanted to join. It could not have been any plainer. You are not wanted here. So how does a door that had been locked for more than a century and a half finally get forced open? It did not happen from inside the Corps. It took an order from the most powerful man in the country. What finally forced the door open was not a change of heart. It was pressure from the very top of the government. In 1941, President Franklin Roosevelt signed an executive order banning racial discrimination in the defense industries and the government, and it created a commission to enforce it. Under that pressure, the Marine Corps, deeply unwilling, was finally ordered to begin accepting black recruits. Recruiting began in the summer of 1942, and black Americans came forward in the thousands, eager to serve, eager to prove that they belonged in the most demanding branch of all. But the Corps was not about to let them train alongside white recruits. The white recruits went to the famous boot camps at Parris Island and San Diego. The black recruits were sent somewhere else entirely. A separate, segregated camp, built for the purpose, called Montford Point. Montford Point sat on a swampy peninsula on the edge of the huge Marine base at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. While the rest of the base had the long beaches the Marines needed for their amphibious training, Montford Point had a snake and insect-ridden stretch of forest and marsh. The men lived in prefabricated huts. The mosquitoes and biting flies came in clouds. There were snakes, and there were even bears. It was, in every physical sense, the least of what the base had to offer, handed to the men the Corps had been forced to accept. But the hardest part was not the swamp. It was the humiliation built into every day. The town of Jacksonville next door was strictly segregated, the white side divided from the black by the railroad tracks. Recruits arriving from the north, men who had never lived under the harsh segregation of the South, got their first taste of it before they even reached the camp. On the train down, a curtain divided the dining car into a white section and a black section. When one recruit from Brooklyn finally reached the bus station in Jacksonville, the cafe there would not even accept his meal ticket because of the color of his skin. He had volunteered to die for his country, and he could not buy a sandwich in the town beside his own base. And here's the detail that captures it all. These men were United States Marines in training to fight and die for their country, and they were not allowed to set foot on the main base of Camp Lejeune, the base they were technically part of, unless they were escorted by a white Marine. A black Marine could not walk onto his own Corps' ground alone. He needed a white man to bring him in. Imagine earning the hardest title in the American military and still needing an escort to walk through the gate. At first, the men were trained by white officers and white drill instructors, some of whom had little interest in seeing them succeed. But that changed, and it changed in a way that became a point of fierce pride. By 1943, black sergeants had taken over the training. Men like Gilbert Johnson, known as Hash Mark, for the many service stripes he had earned across nearly 20 years in the Army and the Navy before he became a Marine. And Edgar Huff, another towering figure. These black drill instructors drove their recruits even harder than the white instructors had, and they did it on purpose. Because they understood something the recruits had to learn fast. A black Marine would never be judged by the same standard as a white one. Good enough would never be good enough. As one of those legendary drill instructors put it, you had to be better than any Marine in the whole area. Not as good, better. Hashmark Johnson described himself, only half joking, as an ogre, but a fair one. He and the others were not being cruel for its own sake. They were building men who would have to be twice as good just to be called equal, and who would carry the reputation of every black Marine still to come on their shoulders. They forged these men in that furnace, knowing that only the very best would be allowed to stand as proof for the rest. The camp itself would one day be renamed in honor of Hashmark Johnson. So these men endured the swamp, the insults, and some of the hardest training in the military, and they earned the title of United States Marine. And then they discovered the final insult waiting for them. Even now, the Corps did not really want to let them fight. The Montford Point Marines were sent overseas in segregated units, and those units fell into two kinds. Some were combat units, defense battalions built around anti-aircraft artillery, and the men of these battalions were superb. One of them, the 51st, trained to such a level that it broke almost every accuracy record in the Marine Corps for its guns. They were, by the numbers, some of the finest artillery Marines in the entire service. And it did not matter, because the doubt about black men in combat was so deep that when these highly trained battalions were shipped to the Pacific, they were deliberately posted to quiet, outlying islands far away from the real fighting. The men trained and ready to fight were kept from the fight, so that no one would have to admit they could do it. It was prejudice dressed up as policy, and it wasted some of the best gunners the Corps had. The other kind of unit was the ammunition company and the depot company. On paper, these were labor units, support troops. Their job was to haul ammunition and supplies onto the beaches and keep them flowing to the frontline troops. They were given less combat training than anyone because the Corps did not expect them to fight. And so, by a bitter irony, it was these men, the ones the Corps had least prepared for battle, who ended up in the worst of it. Because on the beaches of the Pacific, there was no safe rear area. When you landed supplies under fire on an island the Japanese were defending to the death, you were in the battle whether the paperwork said so or not. And so the black Marines of the ammunition and depot companies, the men who were never supposed to see combat, found themselves fighting as riflemen, defending the beachhead, and carrying the wounded and the dead back out of the fire as stretcher bearers. They learned to fight in the only classroom that truly counts, which is combat itself. It began at the island of Saipan in the summer of 1944. Black Marines came ashore with the supplies and were thrown almost immediately into heavy fighting, helping to throw back fierce Japanese counterattacks that came at the beachhead in the dark. Men who had been trained to stack crates and haul shells found themselves shoulder to shoulder with the assault troops, firing their rifles to hold the line. When the fighting was over, white Marines who had watched them stand and fight came away with a new respect that no amount of pre-war prejudice had prepared them for. It was there, on the 15th of June, 1944, that a young Marine named Kenneth Tibbs was killed. He was the first Black Marine to die in combat in the Second World War, one of many who would fall doing a job they had been told they would never have to do. And then came the most famous and most terrible battleground of all, Iwo Jima. On the 19th of February, 1945, Black Marines of the ammunition and depot companies landed on that infamous black volcanic sand, some of them coming ashore at nearly the same time as the first assault waves. There was no shelter on Iwo Jima. The whole island was a killing field, raked by Japanese guns dug deep into the rock. Every yard of that beach registered by an enemy who intended to make the Americans pay for all of it. The men worked their labor parties while in direct contact with the enemy, hauling ammunition through the fire, unloading it under shell bursts, and picking up rifles to fight when the enemy came close. They carried the wounded back through the chaos, and they buried the dead. Their commander praised the coolness and courage they showed under those impossible conditions, saying they had continued to do their work while under fire as steadily as any Marines he had seen. For their service on Iwo Jima, the Black Marines who supported that battle were awarded a unit commendation, an honor reserved for service equal to the highest standards of heroism. At Okinawa, the largest number of Black Marines yet, around 2,000 of them, saw action in the last great battle of the Pacific. Island after island, the men of Montford Point proved the same thing over and over. Put in front of the enemy, they fought, and they fought as Marines. The white officers who led them, many of whom had started out full of doubt, came away saying there was no longer any question about it. These were Marines. Full stop. For decades after the war, the Montford Point Marines were almost completely unknown. Their story was not told in the movies. It did not appear in the popular histories. Even other famous Black units of the war, like the Tuskegee Airmen, captured the public imagination in a way these men never did. Fighter pilots had glamour. The men who hauled ammunition through the fire on a volcanic beach did not. And so they came home, and they went quiet, and the country simply forgot them. But the thing they had done could not be undone. They had made it impossible for the Marine Corps to ever go back. In 1948, the President ordered the desegregation of the entire military. Montford Point, the segregated camp, closed its doors in 1949, and by the following year, the Marine Corps was fully integrated. Around 20,000 Black men had passed through that swampy camp, and by proving themselves in training and in battle, they had broken open the most exclusive branch of the American military forever. The door they had forced open could never again be shut. And finally, at long last, the recognition came. In the year 2011, the government passed a law to award the Montford Point Marines the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor the nation can give. The president who signed it said that despite being denied so many basic rights, these men had served their country with selfless patriotism. In the summer of 2012, the medal was presented, and the surviving Montford Point Marines, old men now, many of them in their 80s and 90s, gathered in Washington to receive the honor their country had withheld for nearly 70 years. They came in wheelchairs and on canes, wearing their old dress uniforms, some of them weeping openly, as a nation that had once needed a white escort to let them onto their own base now stood and saluted them. So many of their brothers had not lived to see it. The men who had trained in that swamp, fought on those beaches, and come home to silence had, most of them, already passed away. Their service never acknowledged in their lifetimes. But those who remained lived to hear their nation finally say the words out loud that they had been Marines all along. A few years later, a memorial was raised in Jacksonville, on the very ground where it had all begun, so that the men who fought for the right to fight would never be forgotten again. The Montford Point Marines were told they were not wanted, yet they fought, died, and forced the Marine Corps to change forever. If you believe these men deserve to be remembered, subscribe and stay with this channel. There are more of these stories than you could ever imagine, and almost no one is telling them.